You're listening to a 95BFM podcast.
You're tuned into The Wire, 1 hour of current affairs and analysis starting now.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jemima Houston toki ingoa, no mai haere mai ki te Wire mō tēnei rā. Kia ora, and welcome to The Wire for Tuesday the 12th of October. My name is Jemima and I'm your host. I'm looking after the show for you today. Joe has been producing from home, so you'll hear a piece from him as well today. I hope you're going well out there and that if you're in Auckland, you're enjoying this little bit of sunshine we've got today. I can see it through the crack above the wall and it looks pretty beautiful, and I hope it stays like that for my wee walk home. We have some good stuff coming up for you on the show today, so do stay tuned in. If I akine, I speak to Dr. Andrew Chen, who is a research fellow for Koitu, the Centre for Informed Futures at the University of Auckland, about how new technologies will help New Zealand live safely with COVID-19 from now and into the future. Joe speaks to Lisa Woods about the condition of prisons amidst the current lockdown and how prisoners must be protected from COVID-19. This week on Tomorrow's World, Isla and Stella discuss the rise of synthetic diamonds with Dr. Jeff Wilmot. And finally, I talk to Dr. Deborah Powell, the National Secretary of APEX, about the month-long strike for Ministry of Education psychologists that started last week. He aho o whakaaro. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these pieces. So tuku pātui mai, you can send me through a text on 5395 or wai mai rānei, give me a call in studio on 309 3879. Also, after the show, ko e wariwari, e ahi ana koutou te whakarongo ke e nei kōrero anō he pakihiri rukiruki mārunga i te pai tukutuku o Irarangi Poho, me haere ki 95BFM Irakati.com. You can catch all of these stories and more by podcast on the 95BFM website, 95BFM.com. If you head to the Bcasts page and then you click on the link for The Wire, you can check out all the bits and pieces that have been created by the Wire teams over the last few weeks. So if you've tuned in halfway through a show and you were like, that sounded really interesting, but I didn't get to hear the whole thing, you can check those interviews out there. They're always podcasted straight after the show's gone to air, so do check that out. There's also been some really awesome work done by the wider BFM family, the BFM DJs, who have been doing awesome work from home. So if you feel like you've got a spare moment and you want to listen to something in the past but now, then you can check that out there as well. All the shows are linked on the Bcasts page and all their various segments are linked as well. So do check that out. There's been some awesome work done, and yeah, I know if you're in Auckland there's still a little bit of time sort of hanging around, so always a good thing to do if you're feeling like you're at a loss of things to do. I know that TV's getting a bit boring. I'm certainly finding TV a bit boring now. But anyway, enough of me chatting away. Let's get cracking into the show. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has, on the advice of health officials, has been making decisions about new technologies such as the contact tracing app and now vaccine certificates. These technologies are designed to help New Zealand deal with the COVID-19 outbreaks within our community. They are new to everyone and have and will make a significant difference to how we go about our day-to-day life. Anecdotally, many people are uncertain and worried about the future now that the government has moved away from a total elimination strategy for combating COVID-19. I wanted to speak to an expert to provide some clarification about how New Zealand will learn to live safely with the virus in the community. I was particularly interested to hear about how these technologies will help to ensure that people can live safely once restrictions are lifted across the country. I spoke to Dr. Andrew Chen, who is a research fellow for Koi2, the Centre for Informed Futures at the University of Auckland. He is an expert in technologies that aim to combat the spread of COVID-19. And we chatted about how the vaccine certificate and the contact tracing app work to keep people safe and why these technologies are important in a suppression COVID strategy for the future. Here is Andrew now. I just want to start talking about the vaccine certificate. Could you explain what this is and sort of what the government currently is planning to do with this technology?
Sure. So a vaccine certificate is one way of helping mitigate the public health risk of having an infectious disease out in the community. So a vaccine certificate would help identify individuals who have some level of immunity to the virus. So ideally it would be people who have had both shots of Pfizer or some equivalent vaccination. And then the idea would be that people who are vaccinated are at lower risk of transmitting the virus to each other, are also at lower risk of getting sick. So they should be allowed to go to festivals and large events, whereas people who are unvaccinated pose a larger health risk, both for themselves, but also to the wider community, because if somebody who is unvaccinated gets very sick, they end up in hospital and ICU, they need a ventilator, that's going to be a drain on public health resources, and that might cause other issues down the line like we're seeing in places like the United States. So a vaccination certificate at this stage looks like it'll be basically a QR code that will be able to be scanned with a verifier app by somebody who's operating a venue, and that will tell them if this person is allowed to get into the venue or not. So what we heard recently was that it would just tell the person who's operating the venue something like a green tick or a red cross and the name of the person. And then in theory, they would have to verify that that name matches you by looking at your photo ID to check that it's the same person. So that's pretty privacy protecting because it's not going to reveal how many shots of which vaccines you've had. It's not going to reveal whether you have any other underlying health conditions. It's really just going to say, yes, you're allowed to get in, or no, you're not.
The thing that comes to mind when talking about a vaccine certificate like this, would it be possible for somebody to sort of fake a QR code like that, or come up with some backdoor way of getting a vaccine certificate that's not actually honest? Is that a concern or something that's been brought up about this technology?
Absolutely. With a vaccine certificate, if it's going to be used to restrict people's ability to move or restrict people's ability to access services and opportunities, then there will be a reasonably high incentive for fraud. The vaccine certificate itself should be pretty secure. So the way that it works is something called public-private key encryption, where the QR code will be secured with basically a password that is only available to the Ministry of Health. And then you'll be able to tell if a QR code is fake or not, because only QR codes that can be unlocked with the relevant decryption password will actually work. So from a certificate perspective, it should be relatively secure. The other point of potential fraud is at the vaccine record itself. And there was some discussion about the risk of things like someone paying another person to pretend to be them and getting a vaccination, and then it being recorded that the vaccination was applied for this person when they weren't actually vaccinated. But I think that that's a corner case. That's not going to happen very often. You've got to be pretty desperate if you're doing that. And so from a public health risk, it should still be pretty limited.
Now, let's move on to talk about contact tracing. Now, obviously, this is a technology that people have reasonably gotten used to. This is something that's been in place for a while. Is there any sort of idea about how this might progress in the future, or what it might look like in the future? Are we going to always have QR codes on doors, or is there going to be perhaps, I don't know, an even easier way to make sure you're contact tracing?
So digital contact tracing using QR codes and Bluetooth is pretty feature complete relative to international standards. So what we're doing here is pretty close to what's happening overseas. there's not a lot more that can be done. There is currently a trial that's being run at Victoria University of Wellington using NFC tags. So NFC is near field communication. It's the same sort of technology as you find in PayWave or in your AT Hop or Snapper card. And so the idea there is that you'll be able to just tap your phone to a tag to check in rather than having to use your camera. It'll save like 3 or 4 seconds. It makes things a little bit more convenient. Particularly, it'll help people with visual disabilities be able to access digital contact tracing, but it won't be a huge difference for the vast majority of people. I think digital contact tracing is here to stay for the foreseeable future, at least another year or so, and that's because contact tracing is really one of our last lines of defence once COVID is in the community. If we want to be able to cut off the chains of transmission, then MIQ can only go so far. Having vaccination can only go so far. You really want to be able to figure out who may have been exposed and isolate them so that they can't spread the virus any further.
I just want to have a chat as well about international standard compared to what we're doing here in New Zealand. New Zealand, until now, in the Delta outbreak, has felt probably quite isolated from the rampant outbreaks that have been happening overseas. Now that we're sort of in this Delta outbreak phase and it looking like COVID-19 is here to stay and the government is not looking to do an elimination strategy anymore, how important is it to look at international standards and what is happening overseas when it comes to our future here in New Zealand and living safely with the virus within the community?
It's really important for us to look at what's happening overseas and to be inspired by what their interventions and mitigations are. I use the word inspired because we still have to make sure that whatever we do here is relevant for our context. In the past, that has meant that we've been targeting elimination when a lot of other countries were not. So we couldn't just copy-paste somebody else's intervention because your tolerance for things like false positives and false negatives is completely different, whether you are learning to live with the virus versus trying an elimination strategy. I think as we move towards having COVID in the community, I think at this stage we're still in a very different position to a lot of other countries. But over time we might want to adjust our settings to be more like what we've seen overseas. And I think the key enabler there is vaccination rates. That's what's going to enable us to have a response that looks more like what's happening in some other countries.
How important are new technologies like the contact tracing app and vaccine certificates for our future of living safely with the virus in New Zealand? Is this something we're just going to have to get used to, having new technologies introduced?
I mean, we owe an obligation to all people to use all the tools that we can in a responsible way to help fight COVID-19. And so where there are new technologies that make sense for our response, we should be adopting them. However, we shouldn't misinterpret any technology as being a silver bullet that's going to suddenly solve all of our problems. Any technology that we use is part of a wider response, and it has to be integrated into the entire response. So we have to use technologies in a clever and smart way, not using technologies just because we think that it's shiny and cool and it'll make everything magically better.
That was Dr. Andrew Chen, a research fellow for Koitu, the Centre for Informed Futures at the University of Auckland, speaking about the importance of new technologies like the vaccine certificate and the COVID Tracer app to helping New Zealanders live safely with COVID-19 from now and into the future, now that the government has moved away from the elimination strategy. You're on the Tuesday Wire on 95 BFM. My name is Jemima. I'm your host. This is my normal wire, so you've got me as usual on Tuesday. Joe is my producer and he's been producing from home. We'll have his piece after a little break. But firstly, here is About a Girl by Nirvana. We'll be back with you shortly. Stay tuned in to BFM.
Wow. Music's everywhere. It's like a cloud of art. Here at 95 BFM, we've sucked up some of the best contemporary bangers, bottled them and chucked them into a special Spotify playlist just for you.
The October playlist features I.E. Crazy, Helado Negro, Ma, JPEG Mafia and more.
Follow 95 BFM on Spotify for a monthly Spotify playlist and stay au fait.
Kia ora, it's Tony here from Tikawiti. I've been listening to your sheep show every week with the girls week in, week out, and I hold out for some actual sheep content, and every single week I'm Sean Short. You know, it's all music, and I've had a gutful. How about a little less the clean and a little more how to clean your Toyota Hilux after a massive dagging session? Does the B stand for bullshit? Either pull your bloody head in or change the name of the show. Thank you.
Vinophiles are welcome to listen, but Freak the Sheep is really about that good New Zealand music. Taylor McGregor hand-delivers interviews, live performances, tempered classics and wretched demos from Godzone. Freak the Sheep with Taylor McGregor, every Wednesday night from 9 till 11 on 95 BFM.
Why should New Zealanders care so much about this?
Because your children will curse you if you don't.
The Wire.
You're on 95 BFM. I'm Jemima and I'm the host of the Tuesday Wire. Earlier today, Amnesty International New Zealand released a statement regarding the condition of prisons during the current lockdown. This comes after 3 new cases were found at Mount Eden Prison. Amnesty says, quote, people in prison have their liberty restricted, making them a vulnerable population. Because of these restrictions, people in prison do not have the same autonomy to protect themselves against COVID-19. Due to the communal nature of prisons, people within these facilities are particularly vulnerable to the spread of COVID-19, unquote. Amnesty International New Zealand is calling for the government and the Minister of Corrections to ensure that proactive measures are taken to protect people in prison through access to vaccinations, PPE, healthcare and mental health services. Joe talked to Lisa Woods, the campaign manager for Amnesty International, on the matter.
What are your thoughts on the current conditions we see in prisons in regards to preventing a COVID-19 outbreak?
Well, it's hugely concerning, because of the restrictions in prison. People do not have the same autonomy to protect themselves against COVID-19. And, due to the nature of prisons, particularly their communal nature, the people in prisons are really vulnerable to the spread of COVID-19. And we have seen with the Delta variant how infectious it is. So there's a really big risk in the prison system. So it's incredibly important that the government is proactively taking measures to ensure those people who are working and living in our prison system are safe.
Today we saw a report released by the Office of the Inspectorate which examined how and why prisoners are moved between prisons. What are your thoughts on the transfer of prisoners and how this impacts the current COVID climate?
Well, I think what's important is we take a human rights approach as well. So I think one of the things that when the government is thinking about what measures and what it needs to do is that they're really upholding the dignity and the human rights of the people in the prison system. So they're coming at it from a place of dignity and care. So recognising that people in the prison system, like all of us, have human rights that the government needs to be ensuring they're upholding, that there are minimum entitlements in the prison system. So that's the important lens that they should be taking to thinking about these measures. But then what's important is that they are thinking about what measures they have in place. So do they have the PPE equipment that they need? Are they taking care when they're transferring people as necessary and so forth? I think what we want to make sure is when they're also taking these measures that they're ensuring that they're doing what they can to ensure the well-being of people in the prison system as well. So we don't want to see people excessively locked down and so forth. If they can, we want to see sort of measures that as much as possible by taking a proactive stance to prevent Delta getting into the prison system can ensure people's safety.
This lack of proactive measures would not only impact prisoners, but would also impact prison workers. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the reasons that we wrote to the Minister in August with Just Speak was saying, you really need to be proactively thinking about this. So you need to be putting things in place now to ensure that you don't get to the stage where you're dealing with a mass outbreak in the prison system. So the types of things we're thinking about are the protective measures that you can think about generally that you'd need. But things like, are you prioritising vaccinations with people in prison, and what are you putting in place to ensure people have the information and support around that? So we did ask for an update on that. We haven't heard back yet, but even that, which was nearly, not quite, but nearly 2 months ago, is when we were really pushing and expecting to see something proactive then in the prison system, which we're still waiting to hear.
What sort of measures do you think we need to see from the government in order to ensure that prisoners' integrity and health is upheld, as well as to ensure that they aren't a vulnerable population?
Well, some of the things we talked about are the things that you'd expect in society, so, access to healthcare and PPE equipment. But one of the things we really raised is ensuring priority access to vaccinations for these for people in the prison system. So those are the types of things that we'd like to see. It's a suite of things that you need to see to ensure that people in there are protected. But, one of the things that we think is really also important is that this is a really stressful and anxious time for everyone. Whether or not you're in prison, everyone needs that support. So one of the things we really wanted to highlight with government is that it's important they're thinking about that as well. So there's the physical health aspect of it, but what do they have in place to ensure the mental health support for people that might be experiencing increased stress or anxiety because of this time with COVID, and the need to really preempt that as well with proactive actions to ensure people have that mental health support.
This isn't the first time New Zealand has faced a lengthy lockdown. Do you think measures for prisoners should have already been taken to ensure that they don't get exposed to COVID, based on the experience of past lockdowns?
Yeah, well, given the vulnerability of people in the prison system, just as we've talked about in the nature of prison, in the sense that people don't have the same autonomy to protect themselves, the communal nature of prison, we would have expected to see and really hoped that this has been part of planning in the really early stages for how to protect our prison population. And writing to the Minister was certainly something we asked, in the sense of, this isn't our first lockdown, so taking the learnings from previous lockdowns, has this been applied? And that was certainly information that we asked for and really wanted to see and make sure that they are implementing that.
In other countries, we've seen a situation similar to here, where prisoners are becoming a vulnerable population. In fact, recently in Australia, we've seen 40 prisoners infected as COVID has spread to 5 Victorian jails. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and we don't want to see that here. And, we're seeing these cases pop up. So, we'd hope that there's been a lot of planning previous to this to prevent an outbreak. But now more than ever, the government needs to be making sure that whatever measures are needed are in place now, and they're doing whatever they can to support people who are living or working in the prison system to make sure that they're safe.
Lisa highlights the importance of ensuring that there isn't another COVID outbreak and that the rights of prisoners are upheld. Amnesty International New Zealand also says, quote, investing in measures that uphold the dignity and well-being of people in prison is vital to ensuring we all get through this together and do not allow prisons to become hubs of infection that cause further outbreaks within our community. That was Joe speaking to Lisa Woods, who is the campaign manager for Amnesty International New Zealand. Thank you so much for that one, Joe. You're on The Wire on 95BFM. This is the Tuesday Wire. I'm Jemima. I'm your host. We're having a bit of a chill one today on the Tuesday Wire, so I have another little musical interlude for you. Here is Masbo Q with Beat Up, Bullied and Dunked On, featuring Valet and Scissorhands.
We only don't do 'em. We said we only rock with Mavericks. If you a clone, then step off the canvas. Lest you get beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em. We gon' leave you beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em.
Excellently, it was pressing to me. Descended from the parents, I inherited 3 passports. I can flex a triple residency. Probably why I'm passing boundaries so effortlessly. If a rapper wanna step, they step with hesitancy. Cause I'm wrecking with ease. Flow epidemic on these beats that I finessed in the beam. And got a reservoir of seconds I can spend on you dweebs. Think I got a ton of patience, homie, tested to see. I undertook a mission with impossible odds. I can't cruise with no time, uncles. I'm obviously not easily boxed. That's why they be asking, what do I rock? It's Tino Ranga, Tira Tonga, and abolish the cops.
Oh yeah, unapologetic with my fanatic, don't fear. Metal up the team, there ain't no better song here. It's real, we don't do pity, aesthetic, not here. But we nice right here, cause we only rock with Mavericks. If you a clone, then step off the canvas. Lest you get beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em. We gon' leave you beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em. We said we only rock with Mavericks. If you a clone, then step off the canvas. Lest you get beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em. We gon' leave you beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em.
Word to the daughters who robbing me on my flowers. I'm working too many hours, check the time sheet. Cut the sugar out my life, but she's still telling me that I'm sweet. I'll sleep when the job was done. So never too clever, who's your favorite? I'm better. Flow wetter, froze ready like Eddie from Motec, huh? Insecure in your position, so you checking up. Take the front without the rear, out of love or out of fear. I ain't got no competition unless I'm looking in the mirror, oh yeah. Saying that you love me just so you can be my peer. Remember when they hated cause I had a different hair. Now they wanna be invited when it's time for throwing cheers. What the f you think this is? You wanna know the man, but you was trying to kill the kid. Trying to ride my train, you wasn't giving me a lift. Tragic, self-evident to everyone, you ain't no maverick.
We only rock with Mavericks. If you a clone, then step off the canvas. Lest you get beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em. We gon' leave you beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em. We said we only rock with Mavericks. If you a clone, then step off the canvas. Lest you get beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em. We gon' leave you beat up, bullied, and don't do 'em.
The endless parade of time. Who can say what fruits the future will see ripen? We can only keep looking towards
Tomorrow's World with Isla Christensen and Stella Huggins on 95 BFM.
This week, Isla Christensen and Stella Huggins discuss the rise of synthetic diamonds, looking at market pressures, the energy consumption of the synthetic process, and they also get into the science of how diamonds form as carbon under pressure.
Hi, Earthlings.
Welcome back to another episode of Tomorrow's World. I'm Stella Huggins.
And I'm Isla Christensen. This is our segment all about exploring how science affects individuals and our future on planet Earth.
We've discussed topics such as circular economies, marine protected areas, and future diets.
Last time we talked to the incredible Dr. Nikki Hare about the controversial new reality TV show all about activism, which has since been pivoted to a documentary.
We also looked at Nikki's work on the Infinite Game, which is the idea that sustainable communities can be imagined only when long-term issues are prioritised.
This week, inspired by seeing multiple lockdown proposals, we're talking about the future of diamonds.
Often known as a girl's best friend.
Or for stirring up social debates around ethical concerns after watching Blood Diamond.
We wanted to know what the future holds for diamonds, especially as synthetic or lab-grown diamonds seem to be becoming more popular.
We talked to Dr. Jeff Wilmot, who has done his PhD on natural diamond properties and now works with nano and microfluids.
Dr. Wilmot explains the science behind the diamond bling effect, as well as providing an insight into how the strength of diamonds are used in industries.
You know, they're a one-of-a-kind mineral. They've just got these exceptional range of physical properties, and that's why people like them for jewellery. You know, they're extremely hard. They're kind of notoriously the hardest material that we find naturally occurring. And they also have interesting optical properties. So they have a higher refractive index, which means that they're shiny. And that's why people like them for jewellery, right? But they've got a whole lot of other material properties, you know, very low thermal conductivity, high sound velocity, low thermal expansion. All of these are, really extreme values when you compare them with other materials. So so they find a lot of other applications. The only problem is they're, of course, pretty expensive.
Awesome. And so you mentioned then they are expensive, and it is then that the properties, they're unique. But do you think into some element that it's, I guess, the social pressure that has made them so expensive? What makes these, I guess, so rare? Is it because they form over such a long time, or what is it that influences this expense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's some simple market economics there, right, around supply and demand and so on. But there is certainly a kind of mystique and some marketing that has gone into it. And a really good example is Japan, where up until I think it was after the Second World War, it wasn't traditional at all to use diamonds as an engagement token or ring. And now everyone in Japan does it. And that was basically off a marketing campaign from De Beers, which was the dominant diamond company at the time in the 50s and 60s. So there's a mystique and this peer pressure, of course, around engagement, particularly that you have to. There's an expectation that you have to cough up with a diamond. So those aspects do come into it, a kind of perception or marketing aspect. And I guess there's also, for natural diamond in particular, there's at least reasonably widespread knowledge about how they form, deep within under the Earth's crust, and over a long period of time at high temperatures and pressures, and then come to the surface. And I think there's a bit of a mystique around that process as well.
Going into the difference then, what is the difference of a synthetic diamond or a lab-grown diamond?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally it's the same material, right? So diamond's this, crystal of carbon atoms, just carbon atoms, and each carbon atom is bound to 4 other carbon atoms in a tetrahedron, which means the bonds are all equally spaced around in 3 dimensions around each other. And if you make that under the Earth's crust in a natural environment, or if you make it in the lab, it doesn't make a difference, right? It's the same material. Having said that, then there are a lot of differences in how things turn out both in nature and in the lab, but based on the way that things are made, and different impurities can creep in, defects and inclusions and so on. Well, let's talk about natural for a start. So natural diamonds are made, it's a geological process. So you've got this magma, this molten layer of, in the mantle, this kind of semi-molten layer of rock bubbling around, and carbon precipitates out of there and to make diamond. And all the other rock around it is, of course, kind of randomly floating around. And so you get natural diamonds that have all kinds of shapes and inclusions, other minerals included within the diamond. And they're really, pretty rough often when they come out of the ground and have to be worked up to make nice shiny diamonds.
Absolutely. I think what you say there as well, and perhaps that is the uniqueness to it, the rarity of it, that it's naturally forming, that it takes a lot of effort to get one to produce it into this, what we see it as either a diamond or in other aspects. I think something that might be interesting for people listening to is where diamonds are used elsewhere to jewellery, obviously for their strength in production and design. Could you maybe describe a few of those?
Yeah, and that gets into the ways that they're made synthetically. So the 2 major ways to synthetically make diamond, they're called high pressure, high temperature, and the other one is chemical vapor deposition. Okay, so there's 2 ways. And either of those ways, it's quite easy to make what you might call kind of rough or low quality diamond. In particular, high pressure, high temperature, you basically simulate what's happening under the earth, and you squash in a little anvil some carbon, and it precipitates out. And when you're doing that, it's really easy to make small diamonds and kind of low quality diamonds. And that's the type of diamond that you find used on like diamond saws and so tools for cutting and polishing, because it'll still have pretty good properties in terms of hardness and thermal transfer as well. So it takes heat away from a cutting object, but is relatively inexpensive to make. Then the other one, the other technique for synthesizing them is chemical vapor deposition. With that method, you can get quite large scale thin films, right? So you're putting down a thin layer of diamond from a kind of gaseous atmosphere, chemical vapor deposition. So yeah, in that case, you have methane floating around in it.
Absolutely. And something that I didn't know about there is you mentioned the methane. Is there, I guess, then looking at it from an environmental perspective or a sustainable perspective, is it producing the methane? Is it using the methane? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think Right, so if you're going to make diamond, then you need carbon as a feedstock somehow, right? So you're going to take carbon from somewhere and put it into a hard, shiny object. So I guess in that sense, it's a good way to sequester carbon. And the carbon will stick, and eventually the hydrogens will get knocked off, and this builds up and up. So that's great if we want to reduce methane in the atmosphere, of course, but it's hard to do. So you're putting in a lot of energy in order to do that. And of course, your energy has to come from somewhere. You're probably burning some coal out the back to provide the energy. So, it's not about to solve climate change tomorrow, but it is methane being turned into diamond.
That's what I was thinking. We could all, promote it as the way to sequester carbon, walk around with a diamond ring. And on that, I think there is a growing concern for ethical implications of how diamonds are produced and as well environmental impacts. Do you see a future of synthetic diamonds growing?
Yeah, it's really about economics more than anything. There are lab records for using the high pressure, high temperature technique. So that's one that you'll make a crystal rather than a film. And if you sit there and get the conditions right and put in a whole lot of energy, and wait for a week, you can get a good quality diamond, which is 1 carat in size. That's 0.2 grams weight. And the record, I think, is something like 25 carats, right? So you can grow them. But the thing about it is you're just putting so much effort in there, both in terms of the energy costs and the time you have to wait, that it's not necessarily worth it to grow those big diamonds synthetically. It's easier to go and get them out of the ground. Now, you obviously have a whole lot of geopolitical influences around getting diamond out of the ground as well. So that's not straightforward. The types of geological structures where diamond comes from are these old continental crusts. And so it's South Africa, it's Canada, it's Russia and Australia. Those are, the areas where these crusts are. And mining in South Africa historically has been a bit fraught, obviously, with apartheid. And that's a lot of the history of the diamond industry has come through that. So, and then more recently, further north in Africa, there've been the kind of blood diamond stories. So there's definitely an ethical implication to where we get our diamonds from, and people can make those choices about where they buy their diamond. Usually there's certification these days based on either the chemical signature or some laser etching of the diamond about where its origin is, and that could be natural or synthetic.
Absolutely, thank you so much. And I guess just to end, if there is any diamond information that we haven't asked you about, share anything else.
There's lots. They're more common in space, It's easier to make them in space. And it's been figured out about 10 years ago that it's quite likely that the center of Neptune is basically diamond. There's a lot of carbon on Neptune. And if you figure out what the pressure and temperature would be at the center, then we think it'd be carbon. Not only would it be diamond, but it would be metallic carbon. So that's diamond that's been melted down. So actually carbon in space has a whole lot of really exotic possibilities for what it's doing and where it appears.
Who would have known that chatting diamonds would lead back to climate change and capitalism?
It seems, Stella, our podcast has a common theme.
We were almost onto something there with the sequestration of carbon, but as Jeff said, the energy needed to produce synthetic diamonds may outweigh these benefits.
And it's also important to consider that for natural diamonds, an estimated 250 tonnes of earth is shifted for every single carat of diamond.
Hopefully you've learnt something new.
I think I'm off to plan a trip to Neptune.
And just like the diamonds we've been talking about, we know for a lot of BFM listeners, you've been under a lot of pressure with lockdown.
Don't worry, soon you'll be your very own diamond. Stay critical, Earthlings.
Looks like everything's gonna be all right.
Tomorrow's World with Isla Christensen and Stella Huggins on 95 BFM.
Thank you very much for that one, Isla and Stella. Always a really, really good segment. Tomorrow's World is a fortnightly segment, so we get it every second week here on the Tuesday Wire. Always some really interesting topics. Who would have known that the middle of Neptune is liquid diamond? That's amazing. If you have any thoughts on the pieces on the show today, do send me through a text on 5395 or give me a call on 309 3879. We'll be right back with one last piece, but firstly, here is Get It Done by Chai.
shit. You don't got a clue where I is. You don't got a clue where I is. And that's so good, cause I feel great, yeah. My flow like a bang. Got so deep, never bounce back. If you rich, you're good. When you broke, then shit. Work, then get it done. Putting work, then get it done. Putting work, then get it done. Putting work, then get it done. Yeah, yeah. You feel important. I feel important. You look at me the same way when I go out snorkeling. Shock, there's a world outside of mine. Shit, look at that. Fish over there, looking so damn lit. My flow like a bang. Got so deep, never bounce back. If you rich, you're good. When you broke, then shit. Work, then get it done. Putting work, then get it done. Putting work, then get it done. Putting work, then get it done. Yeah, yeah. My flow like a bang. Got so deep, never bounce back. If you rich, you're good. When you broke, then shit. My flow like a bang. Got so deep, never bounce back. If you rich, you're good. When you broke, then shit. 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 Shit.
This is a sad, sad day. BFM, the font of liberalism and tolerance at the centre of the University of Auckland.
The Wire.
You're on the Tuesday Wire on 95 BFM. I'm Jemima and I'm your host. Last Tuesday, over 120 psychologists employed by the Ministry of Education, working in schools and early childhood centres, began a month-long strike. The strike action involves the psychologists refusing to accept further referrals of cases onto their caseload. Last week, I spoke to Dr. Deborah Powell, the National Secretary for APEX, the union representing the majority of psychologists employed by the Ministry of Education. We discussed why these psychologists are going on strike, the pay gap between ministry psychologists and DHB psychologists, and what impact poor conditions for ministry psychologists has on the young people they're supporting in schools. I began by asking Deborah to explain the strike.
Okay, well, the strike is starting today. It will continue for a month. It's a partial strike. So what our team are doing is they're continuing to care for the clients they already have on their books, but they won't be taking any new clients on. Now, quite a few of our psychologists have very, very heavy caseloads, some of them twice as many clients and whānau as they should have. So they're still going to be very busy, but they simply won't be taking on new patients and clients.
Could you talk a little bit more about what this issue is with the Ministry of Education and sort of why there is a difference between the way the Ministry of Education treats its psychologists compared to how the DHB treats its psychologists?
Well, there aren't that many psychologists employed by the Ministry of Education. Let's be clear on that first. We've got about 200. We should have 250. We are running very serious vacancies, and we do have quite a high turnover. About 1 in 5 psychologists leaves the Ministry of Education annually. So that's a fairly high turnover rate at 20%. Bottom line is that the Ministry of Education hasn't paid the attention to this particular group of workers that they should have over the years, and their salary rates have not kept pace with those being paid elsewhere, including in the District Health Board sector. And as a result, we've seen the recruitment and retention issues which the Ministry is now suffering from. So we first raised the issues with the Ministry of Education when we started working with their psychologists about 4 years ago now, and we've been through one round of bargaining and didn't get the matter resolved. This round of bargaining, we've had another go at it 8 months later. We still aren't getting anywhere, and the gap between Ministry of Education and the DHBs is significant. The ministry is offering 97,000. DHBs pay around 110,000 for a experienced psychologist. So, unless we can bridge that gap, we're going to continue to have shortages of psychologists working in the Ministry of Education. And of course, our children and their whānau who desperately need the assistance of these psychologists will be missing out.
Just to put it in context for people, when you're talking about Ministry of Education psychologists, what does that mean for people? Is that psychologists that are working in schools, like under sort of education facilities? Is that the idea?
Yes, basically they're looking after children in schools who have learning disabilities, maybe are on the spectrum of autism, who have had perhaps traumatic experiences in early childhood and as a result, have psychological trauma that needs to be addressed. So very vulnerable children. And, the thing about this particular group of children and the help that their psychologists can give them is with that help, their whole lives will be improved. If they don't get help, then obviously this very early trauma that they've suffered or these difficulties that they're having just continue to affect their lives. So, we aren't just talking about a one-off here. We're talking about the life of these young people and to a large extent their family and whānau as well. So investing in them at this early age it just reaps huge rewards for the length of their life. And it's really an indictment of the Ministry of Education that they haven't put the resources towards ensuring that these young people have that opportunity. That's the bottom line, and we're basically saying, come on, Ministry of Education, it's time to step up here and do the right thing.
Do you think the reason those gaps exist and the reason the Ministry of Education perhaps isn't up to scratch and isn't meeting the same standards as the DHB, do you reckon that a hangover perhaps from a lack of focus on mental health for quite some time and that's sort of catching up? What is a reason that would explain why the Ministry of Education hasn't caught up?
Well, I guess the main workers that the Ministry of Education deals with obviously are teachers, and there are thousands of them, and I wonder if these smaller groups of specialist workers don't sort of get forgotten about, to be entirely honest. Now, as I say, there aren't that many of them, but the work they do with this small group of children, again, it's not the majority of children, thank goodness, but is really, really important. But I do wonder if in the grand scheme of things, Ministry of Education doesn't, simply, forgets about them, if I can put it that way. That's not good enough. In psychological terms, the evidence is really clear that if you have good mental health, if you have good mental well-being as a child, the chances of you having mental health issues or, sequelae, if you like, consequences later on in life is much, much reduced. So the investment in these young people reaps rewards not just for them, but actually our whole system as well. So their own personal well-being and mental health will be improved as they grow older, and the demand on resources for adults who are continuing to suffer from their childhood trauma and childhood experiences or difficulties will be far reduced.